everyone, this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and today I'm going to be talking about white-black in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. As always, the notes are available to follow along at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. So, looking big picture from 17 lands, white-black is the second most successful archetype on 17 lands at the moment, which is impressive because for the most part, green radically overperforms, and white-black is notably not a green deck, but performs better than the green decks other than green-white. It's also drafted much less than a lot of the other archetypes. It's one of the less drafted archetypes. So people should probably be drafting it more than they are, which I think is, not the reason that I chose to talk about it this week, but it's convenient because people should be drafting it more, so it's probably helpful to talk about it. As I see white-black, I think there are several distinct sub-archetypes or different approaches to white-black. I expect that most decks in practice that you see or play against or even likely draft will end up somewhere between these things, using elements from each with a less cohesive strategy or plan than I would recommend. I think that's just kind of generally going to be the case. People typically just take the cards that they see as generically better, whether that's that it's the kind of card that they like. They've had good experiences with it. They've seen people claim that it's a powerful card. They've seen it has good stats on 17 lands. Whatever it is, I think people generally try to draft toward individual power level more than synergy, more than I do. Not necessarily saying it's right or wrong, but I tend to try to make my decks have a very clear focus and try to make all my cards work together, possibly sometimes to a fault. So the ways that I would approach white-black, given that, where I want my deck to be pretty high synergy, one approach is the fodder / aristocrats, ways to sacrifice creatures and creatures that are good at being sacrificed and find synergies there. So cards that I would consider essential to that version of this deck. These are not necessarily the strongest white-black cards, but the cards that are helped most by the rest of these cards are Forsaken Miner, the black 2/2 that you can play from your graveyard when you commit a crime by paying black. Corrupted Conviction, the black instant sack a creature draw 2. Nizumi Linebreaker, the 1/1 warlock that when it dies you get a 1/1 mercenary. Lively Dirge, the uncommon spree black card that can put a creature in your graveyard and return creatures from your graveyard to play with total mana value 4 or less. Mourner's Surprise, the get a creature back from your graveyard to your hand and make a 1/1 mercenary for 1 and a black. Outlaw Medic, the 1/3 lifelink that draws a card when it dies for 1 and a white. Rakish Crew, the 2 and a black enchantment that makes a mercenary and drains your opponent whenever an outlaw dies. Ruthless Lawbringer, the 3/2 for 1 white-black that sacrifices a creature to destroy an on-land permanent, uncommon. Unscrupulous Contractor, the 3/2 for 2 and a black that plots for 2 and a black, and when it enters, you can sack a creature to make target player lose 2 life and draw 2 cards. Vault Plunder, the 3/1 that ETB target player loses life and draws a card. Baron Bertram Greywater, the 3/4 that you can spend 1 and a black and sacrifice a creature to draw a card, and also makes a 1/1 life-linking outlaw vampire when once per turn when you make a token. Prosperity Tycoon, the 4/2 that makes a token, and you can make some mercenary, you spend 2 mana and sacrifice a token to make it indestructible. Rooftop Assassin, the 2/2 flyer that flying lifelink that kills something that's taken damage. Shepherd of the Clouds, the 4/3 flyer that returns a creature to your hand and puts it into play if you have a mana value 3 or less. And Hollow Marauder, the 4/2 flyer that makes your opponent discards, costs less for creatures in your graveyard, and draws a card if they discard something cheap. A lot of cards. Point is, there are a lot of different options for creatures that give you some kind of immediate value or let you sacrifice stuff. Rakish Crew plays super, super well here because a lot of the stuff is incidentally outlaws, like basically all of it. And so you're going to be having a lot of stuff like die and come back or draw more cards so that you can like cycle through your outlaws and trigger your Rakish Crews and burn your opponent out with that. Baron Bertram Greywater is an interesting card. I wasn't very impressed my first time playing with it. I think the reality is that it's a very highly like synergy dependent card. It's looking for like it wants to play in this kind of deck, but it has some specific other cards that it's looking for. Like specifically, it's good with Forsaken Miner, the 2/2 that comes back, Nezumi Linebreaker, the 1/1 that makes Mercenary when it dies, Treasure Dredger, the 2/2 that can tap and pay a life to make a treasure, because that makes a token to trigger the Baron to make a creature. Rakish Crew, because the Baron's going to like go through a lot of stuff, and also if you play Baron then Rakish Crew, you get an extra vampire. Red Rock Sentinel, the 2/4 that lets you sacrifice a land to draw a card and make a treasure, and then that treasure triggers the Baron, and you can kind of keep going with that. And then Boneyard Desecrator, the 4-mana 3/4 menace that can sacrifice a thing, and if it's an outlaw, you make a treasure. So then whenever you sack an outlaw, you get a treasure and another outlaw, so you can just kind of like keep going and making more and more guys that way. Or more treasures or whatever, limited to once a turn, but kind of goes off. And possibly, but I'm a little skeptical, there's some interaction with Luxurious Locomotive, the big vehicle that makes treasures, because when that attack, it triggers Bertram, and then Bertram makes more guys to crew it more to like make more treasures if you can keep it alive. I've never played with that card or seen it in play, but there might be something there. So anyway, Baron, I think, is like really good if your deck has like multiple of those cards that work really well with it, and like pretty bad if you don't have any. So it's a card to like watch for and draft around as kind of its own little sub mission in terms of like find the stuff that works with Baron, like the stuff that makes tokens every turn, as like a thing that you can do in your like fodder deck or not do. So then the next totally different approach to black white is like an attrition crimes deck. There's a lot of really good removal. So there's like Getaway Glamour, which is the white spree card that flickers and kills the biggest thing. Unfortunate Accident, which is the black spree card that kills the thing and makes a mercenary. Binding Negotiation, which is the discard spell. Blood Hustler, which is the guy that grows and you commit crimes. You can spend 4 mana to drain your opponent. Desert's Due, the -2/-2, more for deserts, common black removal spell. Desperate Bloodseeker, the 2/2 lifelink that mills someone for 2. Eret's Lullaby, kill a tapped creature, gain 2 life. Fierce Retribution, kill an attacking creature, or Cleave to kill any creature. Humiliate, the discard spell that puts a +1/+1 counter on something. Journey to Nowhere, the 2 mana exile a creature enchantment. Raven of Fell Omens, the 1/2 flyer that drains when you crime. Servant of the Stinger, the 1/3 lifelink that tutors if you hit your opponent and sacrifice it when you've committed a crime. Shoot the Sheriff, the removal spell that kills a non-outlaw. Bandit's Hall, the artifact that taps for mana of any color and gets a counter when you commit a crime, and then you can remove counters to draw cards. Murder, the 3 mana removal spell. Mystical Tether, the 3 mana Oblivion Ring type effect that exiles a creature or artifact and has flash for 2 mana. Rattleback Apothecary, the 3/2 Death Touch uncommon that gives something lifelink, menace, or I think just lifelink or menace when you commit a crime. And then Red Rock Sentinel is good in this deck as a way to like grind. That's the 2/4 that can sacrifice lands to make treasures and draw cards. Consuming Ashes, the 4 mana exile removal spell that scries. Lassoed by the Law, the Oblivion Ring type effect that makes a mercenary. Ambush Gigapede, the 6/2 that gives something -2/-2, and Hollow Marauder, the big flyer that makes your opponent discard and maybe draws. So a lot of premium removal available in white-black. A few payoffs for crimes. This kind of deck is the kind that's most likely to want to splash, and it's most likely to want to splash blue for those like blue crime payoffs that draw extra cards, especially Intimidation Campaign. But you could also just use Nimble Brigand. Intimidation Campaign is the drain your opponent for 1, draw a card when it enters that returns when you play a crime, and then Brigand is the 1/3 that becomes unblockable when you commit a crime. You can also just use like actual blue card draw spells or whatever. Mostly those, mostly crime payoffs and card draw spells from blue. You can splash red for additional removal and extra crime committing, but red is offering you more of what you already have rather than a different dimension. But if like white or black is somewhat like is not totally open, then you can end up being like a Mardu crime deck for sure. Green's not offering a lot to that build. Green is a good splash in the Fodder Aristocrats deck, specifically for the green-black uncommons, all 3 of them back for more Honest Rutstein and Revival, some Badlands Revival, get things back from the graveyard, so that can work pretty well there. And then the other approach is the least likely to want to splash because it's the most aggressive, even though it's going to have a higher curve than the like Fodder Aristocrats deck. It's has a more aggressive strategy, and that's flyers. There are just a lot of flyers in white and black, and you can kind of make that your plan. So what you'd be looking for here is flyers, ways to get those flyers through by killing your opponent's creatures that can block them, ways to make them bigger, and then because you have like ways to make them bigger, other creatures that are good to make bigger are good. So lifelink is particularly good here, for example. So you get Nurturing Pixie, the 1/1 flyer that gets a +1/+1 counter if you return something. You get Humiliate, which is the discard spell, and then it gets to put a +1/+1 counter on something, which is probably a flyer or lifelinker. You get Outlaw Medic, the 1/3 lifelinker that draws a card when it dies, which like blocks well to help you race in the air. You get Prairie Dog, the 2/2 lifelinker that grows. You get Take Up the Shield to protect your flyers, get a counter on them, get like the lifelink swing to like win races. You get Black Snag Buzzard, the plot 2/1 flyer that's bigger if a creature dies when you play it. Holy Cow, the 2/2 flash flyer that gains 2 and scries. Rooftop Assassin, the 2/2 flash flyer that kills something that's been damaged. Wanted Griffin, the 3/2 flyer that gives you a mercenary when it dies. Shepherd of the Clouds, the 4/3 flying vigilance that returns something. Sterling Supplier, the 3/4 flyer that puts a +1/+1 counter on something. And Hollow Marauder, the 4/2 flyer that makes them discard draws. So a lot of flyers available. You'd be looking to pair that with kind of like any of the removal spells, and then creatures that are just going to like fill out your curve and like ideally lock up the ground while you win in the air. So that's like a more aggressive way to take white black. So those are kind of like the 3 different very synergistic approaches that stand out to me. There's also, you can do just kind of like generic mid-range stuff. You can combine these or whatever into functional decks, but if you want to like lean into like dedicated focused game plans, I think those are good ways to look. The Fodder Aristocrats deck in particular, I think wants a really low curve and like to as many like synergy pieces as possible, because you're basically trying to combine creature that is good to sacrifice with thing that is good at sacrificing creatures equals like profit. Like each of those things makes the other one better than it would otherwise be. So you want like as much, you want basically half your deck to be one, half your deck to be the other, and then you get to kind of mix and match and combine them like several times, getting like extra value every time you combine them. Whereas if you have like just a little bit of that stuff and you're mixing it with other stuff, then you're more likely to draw all cards from one category or the other and not be able to do the thing, or only be able to do the thing once. It's fine to, play some removal, and there are like some kind of like lower like slant synergy cards that work with some of what's going on, but like not exactly that. Like Desperate Bloodseeker, the 2/2 lifelink that mills, is a way to like mill yourself to like do like get your recursion stuff going. That is like in line with, but not exactly part of the core strategy. And then like Vengeful Townsfolk, the 3/3 that gets bigger when a creature dies, is very much looking to be around for this thing to happen, but I think it's like less important than your A plus Bs. It's like a C where it gets you extra value every time you do the thing, but you need the other pieces to like do the thing to like be getting value out of it. So it's like good in the deck, but I think that you want to focus on like the machinery rather than like this external payoff. A way that you can think about the difference between like the fodder deck and the attrition deck is the attrition deck is very obviously like your classic small game deck. You know, you're just like killing everything, getting down to not very many cards, and then ideally you have a way to like draw cards to break parity there. But you're doing very traditional small game control stuff. Whereas the fodder deck is a big game deck, kind of. Obviously, anytime you sacrifice your own thing, you're like shrinking rather than growing your board, except you're like sacrificing it to get something. So it's still kind of like moving forward and expanding. And like most importantly, you value all the stuff that just like leaves extra objects and you like want more stuff in play so that you can be getting paid, like so that you're ready to sacrifice stuff to get paid for it. So even though like there's this intentional culling of your own objects and resources, your like strategy and like gameplay approach is very much big game where like more objects is better for you, because your cards just work better when there's extra stuff around. So basically there's like a big game white black deck that wants like a low curve and small creatures to like go wide and then spend those on things. And then there's a small game deck that's just trying to kill everything. And then there's the flyer deck that's kind of agnostic to that whole axis, and it's just trying to get your opponent dead with evasive threats. So the attrition deck is happiest to splash because you're trying to make the game go longer. Like two main reasons. One, you're trying to make the game go longer. Two, they're like your colors are really, really, really good at doing the small game kill everything part. But the card advantage that you're getting is mostly like borrowing from the fodder deck, and mostly it's just like ways to go up a 1/1 or something here and there, which you can win by like killing everything except you have like a couple little creatures left and you attack them. But it's a lot easier to win by killing everything and drawing a bunch of cards and burying your opponent. And splashing is kind of necessary to get into that space. And then the flyer deck, like I said, don't think it's really into splashing. Let's see, I talked about how the like fodder, so the fodder deck is like most likely, I think, to splash red actually for extra mercenaries, but it can also splash green for extra recursion, the uncommons that I mentioned. The crimes deck is most likely to splash blue for card advantage, but could splash red for extra removal and crimes. Flyers, probably not splashing, but it could. And then, somewhat separate from all of these things, I think there's like a different build of this deck that cares about the recursive elements but doesn't care about the sack stuff. So you're looking for it's the way that the blue red instance deck is borrowing the blue cards from the blue white instant deck and pairing them with the red instance. The black white recursion deck is borrowing cards from the green black like self mill graveyard recursion deck and pairing them with the white support because white has the 4/3 Shepherd of the Clouds as an additional recursion card. And a lot of the like self mill recursion stuff is kind of self contained in black. So, like, green's not offering a ton there. You can swap in white instead and basically have the same game plan. So, there's a version of the deck that doesn't care about, you know, making your corrupted convictions and ruthless lawbringers and unscrupulous contractors work, but is interested in Mourner's Surprise or potentially Lively Dirge, the cards that get things back from your graveyard, Shepherd of the Clouds, and then you compare that with Desperate Bloodseeker, the 2/2 lifelink that mills you for 2, and the Hound that surveils 2, the common 3/2 for 3, to fill your graveyard outside of just combat and playing a game of Magic to fill your graveyard. And then that deck can splash green for the extra recursive elements, or like pivot into more of an Abzan deck. So that's another like kind of lower synergy deck that exists. That's like kind of a white-black deck, but mostly like a slanted version of the green-black deck. And so then there's also like an Abzan deck that's basically just the green-black deck, but uses white cards because it's easy to do that because they're on plan and green helps splash and stuff like that. I think most of the time that you're splashing green, there's like it's very easy for that to spiral into base green splashing white or black. And then I think those decks are like pretty different than the like base black white decks that splash. So as far as like the white black philosophy, I think the red and blue splashes are like less disruptive, where the green, it's not that it does anything wrong, it's just that it kind of changes the focus of your deck most of the time. Also, incidentally, this like recursion heavy plan, I think, is most likely to be what you want to do when you open a really good rare creature that you just want to make sure that you consistently have access to. Like Dust Animus is a good example. The 2-mana 2/3 flyer with plot that if when it enters, if you have 5 or more untapped lands, it has 2+1/+1 counters and a lifelink counter. It's a really strong creature that like you're probably winning if it's in play. So you play it, and then you play a bunch of ways to like mill and get it back so that you can keep it around, and then you prioritize other high impact creatures that you can also like find and get back, and so that all kinds of like works out by revolving around like your strongest creatures. So yeah, that kind of that covers my thoughts. So a lot of different approaches. You kind of want to figure out like which direction you're going. I think, it's good to have an idea early in the draft, but obviously, a lot of the good cards are going to work in any of these. These are about like how you kind of like shift your evaluations of cards as you go through the draft. So like it's easy to, kind of smoothly pivot from one to the other. And I don't think you want to be like hard committing to one early in the draft and taking like a weaker card that's better if you get all the synergies where you don't know if you're going to get those synergies. So I think you want to be, kind of like undecided, aware of all the options. Like, okay, I'm in white black, let's kind of figure it out for like the first half of pack one. Toward the back half of pack one, you're going to start seeing some synergies develop. And then as you get to like mid pack two, kind of like firmly settle into a lane, only to be disrupted if you get like a significant curveball, like a high payoff for going in a different direction as you get later into the draft. So I always get asked about like when you should draft this and what puts you into it. I think a lot of the cards are pretty strong, and given how successful and underdrafted the archetype is at the moment, I think like if it looks reasonable, it's like a good place to try to go. I think that basically, as I see it, the two main schools to draft in this format are either all else equal, look to start with green, or all else equal, look to start with black. I think those are like the two best and deepest colors. Green is stronger on individual card power, but more contested. Black is a really nice kind of like base color for people who are looking to play a more reactive, controlling, synergistic game because it has such good removal. So if you are approaching the format from the base black perspective, then it's really easy to end up here if like you just take some black cards and then, you know, see a good white card before you see a good card of another color and kind of try to settle into a white black lane. Of course, you could also just get a really powerful card that's in this space and go from there, which is how a lot of drafts go, just because, you know, there are strong rares or whatever. So that's going to cover the lecture portion. So as always, I'm going to thank the newest patrons and then turn it over to Twitch chat for questions. So thank you very much to Kieran, Ryan, and Dom. Really appreciate the support. If anyone else is interested in checking out the offerings on Patreon, again, that's patreon.com/draftingarchetypes to see all that and join and get those benefits and support the podcast. So let's take a look at some questions. Don't you think that Flyers is the worst in this list because there are basically a lot of reach creatures at common? One of the best green commons has reach. No. I mean, so the Flyers is very clearly less my speed than the other archetypes because it's more aggressive and lower synergy, and that's just not what I'm about. But I don't think it's like fundamentally weaker, and I don't think that like the amount of reach is in any way a deal breaker for it. Like the red 2-mana 1/3 reach is not very hard to attack through. It's not very big. And then the other reach creatures are primarily like 5 and 6 mana. So you can like get pretty far ahead, and then they tap out to play one of those to stabilize, and then you're playing white black, so you have a bunch of good removal, so you just kill their reach creature and keep attacking. Your flyer deck isn't all creatures, and like the strength of white black is that you're so good at answering stuff that I really don't think a reach creature is going to be like the thing that I'm afraid of running into when I'm playing that strategy. Like I'm more worried about the fact that I'm spending extra mana on my threats to get evasion, and that means that if I play against the like all removal intimidation campaign deck, it's going to be harder for me to like get them dead before they like their card advantage buries me. And if I play against like a relatively aggressive like red black outlaw deck, then where I need to like block because they're playing creatures faster than I am and kind of like pressuring my life total, like the extra mana that I've spent for flying isn't gonna like help me defend myself. That said, this format I think has not that many. I guess like the other really aggressive deck is like the green white mounts deck is another deck where you can like struggle because you're like behind with your flyers. But I think a lot of the decks in this format are more like mid-range and control type spaces, and the like hard to block pressure like has a pretty good home against them. And against the like aggro decks, the natural draw to want lifelinkers plays very well against those aggro decks. So like if you have, you know, like some outlaw medics or prairie dog or take up the shield, like there's a lot of counterplay to like racing those kind of decks that are trying to get under you. So like I don't think that like the flyer strategy is like fundamentally flawed due to the nature of the format or anything. At a white black deck just splashing back for more. Yeah, I like I said, I think that the green black uncommons are the most likely green splash in a white black deck before you get into like with the white green stuff, it's like early game stuff that's going to kind of pull you into heavier green, whereas the black green stuff is like late game stuff that you can do as light splash. I often find myself in white black after taking a mix of green, white, and black cards early. Is that a good way to do it, or should I not fight for green at all? Any thoughts pivoting into white black from a green start? So this kind of speaks to what I was talking about the like two kind of like core approaches to the format, where it's like, do you look like it almost comes down to, are you happy about first picking the mount fight card, the bite card, throw from the saddle? Yeah, throw from the saddle. If you're happy to first pick throw from the saddle, you're probably someone who is looking to start green, and you're going to start a lot of your drafts green, and sometimes you're going to get pushed out because everyone else is green, and a lot of the time you'll just like end up playing green because green is very deep. I am not happy to first pick Throw from the Saddle or Cack Tarantula or whatever. My belief is that a lot of the people are going to be drafting green, and they're going to start drafting green because they have a very, very powerful rare or uncommon that they opened, and they're not going to give up on green because of that. And I don't want to start drafting green behind them with like a weaker common and still often end up like fighting over a very highly contested color. But I think that, like everything kind of comes down to which other cards you're going to be how drawn to, how likely you are to like abandon versus fight for green, and like you as a player, what kind of decks you're most comfortable piloting and like finding in the draft, where it's not hard to imagine that for a lot of players, they're going to win more if they do look to be green when they can in this format. So if you are someone who starts green, then it makes sense that you would pivot into white black because, for one thing, if you start green, you're probably looking to draft the like cards that perform well on 17 lands, which means that you're mostly looking to avoid red and blue cards anyway. So you're mostly going to be drafting from among green, white, and black cards. And then if green is cut, you're going to naturally find yourself in white black. So there's a very coherent path, especially for people who are really kind of like drafting by the numbers in terms of like picking cards with higher 17 land win rates, to like start Abzan and end up just black white anytime green is very cut. My personal strategy is to not start green and move into green when I either open a busted green card or if green somehow seems open, but that never happens, basically. And so, like, from my way of drafting, I'm not often going to go from Abzan to black white. But there is a very cohesive method of drafting that will lead to that happening. Would Brimstone Roundup have a place in the Aristocrats Attrition version of the deck? It's difficult to make double spelling. Is it difficult to make double spelling work in the Marty space? Brimstone Roundup does have a place there. I mentioned that, like, if you're splashing, it's probably 4 extra ways to make mercenaries. Brimstone Roundup and At Knife Point would both qualify. Cards like Mourner's Surprise, the get a creature back, make a mercenary, and Corrupted Conviction, sack a creature, draw 2, are both like card draw spells. Like, they put extra spells in your hand when you cast them. And so they make it easy to double spell. And Unscrupulous Contractor, Vault Plunderer, Outlaw Medic replacing itself. Like, it's actually pretty easy to draft this deck in a way that has like a lot of card flow. And so you can also, I mean, they're also just like plot cards that are like in line with what you're trying to do here. So there's certainly a way to draft a Mardu deck. Could be white black splashing red or some other color distribution that's pretty good at using Brimstone Roundup. You won't always have that, and you want to be careful about it, but there is a place for it. Did we talk about Omenport Vigilante, the 2/2 that gets double strike when you commit a crime? I didn't. I think it's like somewhat generically playable. Obviously, like theoretically can be a card that's like better in the crime deck. The sort of output that it gives you isn't the sort of output that I'm all that impressed by in the crimes deck. I think, it's fine to get like a little bit faster of a clock there. There are some versions of, removal heavy decks that are clocking your opponent, but for the most part, a creature that often hits a little bit harder or whatever isn't, I think, super relevant to the strategy. It's like a fine 2-drop that's like going to be better than like, like a stable, like the tapper guy or whatever if you have a bunch of removal spells, but I don't consider it like a key card for the archetype. How do I like Thunder Lasso in these decks? So that's the uncommon equipment that gives the equipped creature +1/+1, and when it attacks, you tap something. I think it's not very exciting. I think like some versions of the flyer deck, like if you are lifelink heavy and maybe a little short on flyers or happen to be a little heavy on crime triggers, could want it because it just like helps you attack and stuff. But I don't think it's very good in either of the other approaches. Yeah, I think the time to be looking at it is like when you have life linkers, you're like pretty aggressive, and you have like some number of crime payoffs and like not that many ways to commit crimes. It's a question about Rustler Rampage, which is the uncommon spree card that untaps all creatures target player controls and gives target creature double strike until end of turn. I have never played it or particularly wanted to, and white black doesn't strike me as like the deck that it would be best in. I'm not gonna commit to like it's always unplayable, but it's not appealing for me in this space. Sounds like that's gonna wrap it up for this week. So thanks everyone for listening as always. I will not be recording an episode next week. I've missed very, very, very few weeks over the course of this podcast, but I'm taking a vacation next week. I won't be home at my setup, and I'm, just going to take the week off. Totally unrelated to this set or Magic or anything, but so no podcast next week, and I'll return the following week with more coverage of Thunder Junction. This weekend is the upcoming Arena Open, so good luck in that, everyone, and I will be back in 2 weeks. Bye for now.
Prepare for light speed.